Welcome to the St. Louis Pain Expert Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Dave Candy. I have with me today a special guest, Beth Shaw. She's the CEO and founder of YogaFit. She's the author of 4 books and the host of Make America Healthy radio show. So welcome, Beth, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Dr. Candy, thank you for having me.
So you've got a new book, Healing Trauma with Yoga and Mind-Body Techniques. And yoga and mind-body techniques are highly related. I treat a lot of people with chronic pain, and I see that trauma is highly involved in chronic pain. So I'd love to discuss that with you. But can you just first fill people in a little bit more as to your background and how you got into the world of yoga and trauma?
Yes, I have been studying health and wellness pretty much since my teenage years, but I taught myself how to do guided meditation and imagery when I was 6 years old because I suffered from horrible migraine headaches. And I grew up in a family that, let's just say, they weren't that invested in what was going on with me. So I taught myself how to do guided imagery. I cured myself of the migraine headaches, which also, they were very detrimental to me at the time. I would get white lights in front of my eyes. They would usually end with some type of nausea and vomiting. So to be able to self-cure was pretty amazing. I've been studying nutrition and psychology since high school. I've been working out since age 15 at the gym. And I started my company, YogaFit. It's a school. And I started that in the mid-late 90s to teach people how to teach yoga and other mind-body disciplines, and also just how to appreciate yoga in a very safe way.
And for people listening who don't know, YogaFit really brought yoga into the mainstream here in America. So thank you so much for your work with doing that. So how does one discover meditation at such a young age of 6 years old?
I can only credit it to spiritual intervention, to be honest with you. I would just start to visualize myself either on the beach or in a forest in a calm, serene setting. And it really seemed to help. I have really no explanation for it other than spiritual intervention.
Oh, however you discovered it, I'm very happy that you did. So the topics of trauma and depression and pain, they're kind of different aspects of the same thing. But can you discuss how trauma and depression are related? They seem to go hand in hand.
Yeah, well, Dave, as we get into in the book, people who score high on the Adverse Childhood Experiences test, which the book opens with, it's a 9-point test. And it asks things like, did you come from a family where someone was incarcerated? Did you come from a family where someone was an alcoholic or drug addict? Was there a death in the family? Did you experience any physical, sexual, or emotional trauma as a child? And so once people take the test and score themselves, then they can really see what type of trauma they're dealing with. And it's scientifically proven that people who have had more childhood trauma experience higher levels of depression, suicide, more failed relationships, unemployment. There's a whole host. Obviously, addiction is huge. For any of us who have had childhood trauma, the issues live in our tissues. We really, really have it locked in our bodies. And so at YogaFit, we have a program called YogaFit Warriors, where we use specific yoga poses to rid the body of trauma poses. And you'll appreciate this, really affect the vagus nerve. And that has been very helpful to thousands of people. And just seeing the work that we've done at YogaFit made me want to write Healing Trauma with Yoga, because as someone who has suffered from depression pretty much my whole adult life and really bad PMS, it's daily work. I don't want to say it's daily struggle. Some days it is struggle more than others, but it is daily work, much like one would adhere to an exercise or diet program. It's daily work to just keep yourself in a state of feeling good naturally without additional outside substances. And so, whether for me, I use working out a lot to manage my mood. I use meditation. I use a whole variety of different topics and things. There's a chapter in the book called Living Your Best Life, where I give 22 different things that I personally do just to be able to manage my mood, because I've been on and off of antidepressant medications since my 20s. And it sometimes worse than others. I've been my own mental health practitioner since the pandemic, and again, sometimes better than others. But for anyone listening who has struggled with depression or anxiety, they know that it is just very much daily practice and just keeping yourself feeling good that day.
And we'll get into probably in a little bit here some of those daily practices and how people can incorporate those into their lives. I know you mentioned adverse trauma, childhood experiences, and those actually they find those in a lot of people with chronic pain as well. And as you mentioned, the issues live in the tissues, so that's very understandable as to why. Now, you mentioned the vagus nerve earlier. I know what that is, but for people who don't have a medical background, can you explain a little bit what the vagus nerve is and how that affects your body?
Well, it really runs, and you're a doctor, so again, correct me if I'm wrong, but it runs pretty much from the brain stem all the way down to the base of the spine and in through our hip flexors. And so some of the poses that we do involve the releasing the psoas, which has some indication of contraction many times around the vagus nerve. And we use poses that will put us into rest and digest, parasympathetic nervous system, instead of fight or flight, our sympathetic nervous system.
Yeah, that's correct. It does come off the brain stem, and it's the nerve that controls all your like visceral functions, your digestion, and things like that. And people who do have chronic low back pain, especially, often have a lot of trouble with their hip flexors. So it's interesting that you mentioned that as one of the stretches that affects the vagus nerve. So going on a little bit more into the yoga aspect of things, how did you start incorporating yoga in your life to improve your health?
Well, I used to do yoga poses as a child, and I didn't really know what they were. And I would do some after my workouts. Again, I've been working out since age 15. When I moved from New York to LA after college, yoga was just one of those things that you get into. I also got a waterbed because I thought that was a California thing. But I started practicing yoga. And Dave, my first teacher was 93 years old, and she would teach from a desk. And she had gone to Rishikesh, India in the late 1960s when she had a cancer diagnosis. And she implemented Ayurvedic medicine. She implemented yoga, meditation. She cured herself of the cancer with the help of those outside influences, came back to the US and started writing books on yoga and instructing. And Renee Taylor, she was my first instructor. I feel very blessed that that was kind of my first formal yoga experience. And it's at times that I've gone through particularly rough periods, my yoga practice, my meditation, listening to Sanskrit chants have become crucial to me in order to keep my mental equilibrium.
And how does yoga affect people's mental equilibrium or help with depression or post-traumatic stress disorders and things of the like?
Well, first of all, it connects us to our bodies on a very deep way so that we are able to really get a sense of what's good for our bodies and what's not. Yoga also gives us the opportunity to witness our thoughts so that perhaps we don't get too attached to the 60,000 thoughts we have a day. From a physical standpoint, it helps lower blood pressure, uh, lowers cortisol levels, balances insulin. It is the only thing that makes our brain release GABA naturally. And it, again, most practices will put us into the parasympathetic nervous system, and you're working your body, your mind, your spirit simultaneously. And at YogaFit, our essence is breathing, feeling, listening to your body, letting go of judgment, expectation, competition, and being present in the moment. And I think that presence of moment is also a gift that many people are not able to give themselves, but to truly be present in the moment brings joy, because as we both know, depression often comes from focusing on your past, and anxiety comes from focusing into the future. So if we can stay present in the moment, it truly becomes the gift of presence.
Yeah, I think that was that Confucius or something like that who was credited with that statement of there are 2 days you can't control. One is tomorrow, and is yesterday, or something of that nature. But living in the present is a gift that we've lost in this day of in age. Everything is so fast paced and always what's next, especially this time of year around the holidays. But New Year's is coming up, and people are starting to focus on resolution. So, how can people improve their health coming up into the new year?
First, I think it's important to take a very accurate assessment of where you're at. And in my experience, there are always things we can improve on. I'm constantly refining the foods that go into my body, of what I'm consuming, avoiding news channels and things that are going to make me more depressed, making sure that I believe in exercising every single day. And that exercise can take the form of a very long walk with your dog. It can take the form of going to the gym and doing strength training, or some cardio, some yoga, Pilates, dance class. you know, our society has set us up. So unfortunately, now that we're, glued to our desk, unless we have the good fortune to have any kind of physical labor job, and we're not supposed to be sitting so long. And so I think movement is key, hydration is key, clean water is key. I've been very successful in continuing to remove any processed foods from my diet. And, I'm gluten free, but I've recently just even stopped eating gluten free bread and things that are processed, reading the labels, and just being the ever present guardian to your physical and mental health. It sounds like a lot of work, but if you are empowered to make healthy choices or healthier choices, you will see that those efforts do add up over the course of time. Much like making unhealthy choices leads to the body that you're in. And genetics are one thing, but Bruce Lipton and his theory of epigenetics and many other scientists have proven that even if something is in our DNA, we can outwit it with healthy lifestyle. And given the fact that 80% of all adult disease is self-created, I believe that we need to educate ourselves to exercise free choice, but good choice.
Agreed. And for people who aren't familiar with that term, epigenetics, essentially we're given genes in our DNA from our parents, and we have no control over that. But a lot of new science is showing that we can actually control through our lifestyle habits and the way that we live our daily life, which of those genes are expressed and which of those genes aren't expressed. And so that comes down a lot to what you were talking about before is daily habits. And I know you mentioned you have 22 of them. That may be a little overwhelming for someone who's just starting out, but what are a couple of the top habits that you would recommend someone start if they were going to start into a better lifestyle?
Well, definitely incorporating yoga or some type of a flexibility regime as part of your daily practice. We all could use, and you know this better than anyone, Dave, we all could use to release our low backs, our hips, our hamstrings. I've written 4 books. They all have the title yoga in them somewhere. There's a lot of quick things that one can do to really alleviate back pain. So flexibility regime, because as we get older, we get more brittle. And there's a saying, an Asian saying, that it's like we should be like bamboo, strong and flexible. So I'm challenging myself to get stronger as I get older. I go to the gym, I lift heavy weights at least 3, 4 times a week. I use red light therapy to improve mitochondria production, and it just puts me in a better mood. I practice inversions because they're also very good for mood. And I've written many articles on yoga for depression versus yoga for anxiety, and it's two different practices. When depressed, we are stagnant. And when we're anxious, we need to calm down. So, for those people who are suffering from depression, they should embark on a very active yoga practice. And those people who have anxiety may lean more towards restorative yoga and things that are more calming. Definitely meditation is free and it's something that everyone can do. I have several meditations on iTunes, but you can go on YouTube and get any kind of meditation. I play chanting music and sound healing in my house every day. And those days that I wake up that I'm not feeling 100%, I will make sure to move my body for at least an hour. I also believe in taking a lot of supplements and staying hydrated.
Wonderful. Those are great habits. Um, Now, you mentioned the yoga for depression being different from yoga for anxiety. Can you expound on that a little bit more?
Yeah. Again, oftentimes depression feels heavy. It's stagnant chi. And when we're depressed, a lot of times we become lethargic. We don't want to move. Everything feels like tremendous effort. And I know this because I have personally experienced this a lot. I will also add for your listeners that the importance of regular blood work is key, especially if you're over 40 years old, because your hormones can change in a minute. This past summer, I was severely depressed. I actually had some suicidal ideation. I was going through some business challenges and breakup, and but then I went, to my functional medicine doctor. I had my blood work done again, and apparently my testosterone levels were super low. So I think we need to make sure that we understand our baseline and then layer in things like the exercise and the yoga and the movement and the meditation.
Well, thank you for being a little bit vulnerable there with your own experiences. I mean, that just goes to show that even people as successful as Beth are still undergo struggles, that everyone goes through that. And there's a lot of stories like that in your book, I believe you mentioned. Can you share a couple other stories and how people have used yoga to overcome some trauma that they're going through?
Yeah, there's a great story in Healing Trauma with Yoga about a gentleman who was part of the Canadian Air Force. He was in the Canadian military, and they were sent out to Nova Scotia to deal with a major plane crash. And because of the carnage that he saw, the dead bodies, he got into a state where he started drinking and became an alcoholic. And through the practice of yoga and mind body tools, he was able to stay in recovery, get his life back together. And that's really one of my favorite stories. I find it especially touching when men share their stories, because I know that it's a little bit more challenging for men to open up like that. So, in the book, 13 people, myself included, share our trauma stories and how we use yoga, meditation, sound healing, exercise to, I don't want to say heal, because I think that perhaps if we have trauma, we never 100% heal from it. But my goal is just for people to be able to mitigate their daily symptoms and feel better that day. So if we wake up every day and we're just like, positive affirmations, today is going to be a good day. Today I'm going to feel good. And then we do everything to support that feeling good and make sure we're not doing things to be a detriment to feeling good. then we've had a good day, and those good days add up. Those good moments add up, being in a state of joy, singing, dancing, being with your friends, being with your family, enjoying your pets. Finding joy in the small moments of life is one thing that has become very important and incredibly healing on my continued journey.
You mentioned it that you're never really, when you've undergone some sort of trauma, and I would say be that physical or mental, you always kind of carry those scars with you, so to speak. If you uh, are injured in a fire and have a burn or something, that scar never really goes away, although you get past it. So what are some tools that people can use to help when those trigger events start to show up?
I Well, first, I think that recognizing when you've been triggered is really important. And then if you have some type of a meditation or more spiritual practice where you can distance yourself from your thoughts or change your thoughts quickly, because we have a thought and then we have a feeling, and then from that feeling we're either having an action or a reaction. So when negative or intrusive thoughts come around, to try to quickly change them will help with the feeling and then the subsequent behavior. In my experience, that's been very helpful. And I think a certain level of detachment is also helpful. And recognizing that a lot of times we do have choice with our reaction. I've done a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavioral therapy. Obviously, again, a meditation practice becomes helpful. I've also delved into the world of plant medicine, which has given me a glimpse of consciousness beyond my, conscious mind, and that I believe is helpful. So I always like to encourage people, whether it's with weight loss or dealing with trauma, to just try as many things as possible and find out what works for you, because everybody is unique. And we need to have a whole wheel of health with many, many spokes to have an enjoyable life. And also, I will add to that that having higher purpose is super important. In fact, I was just reading, there's a Japanese program that focuses on how having higher purpose is really what keeps us moving and going. And it's called Ikigai. That's Ikigai, finding meaning in your everyday life. So if listeners want to Google that, again, Ikigai. I actually just got back from Japan, where I was working, bringing YogaFit into 3 hospitals and a psychiatric hospital there. And I can tell you that the Japanese people, by and large, are very healthy. I only saw one overweight person in my entire trip to Japan. And, their food source is fortunately not polluted, but they eat small portions, they move around, they go to hot springs, and yeah, it was a great trip.
That higher purpose is important. When your problems seem like they're the center of the universe, it can make them seem very large. But when you have that higher purpose, it can help you put things in perspective and have them not quite seem to be so big. So can you tell me a little bit more about what people can find in healing trauma with yoga and mind body techniques, and where they can get that book if they want to learn a little bit more about it?
If they want to purchase Healing Trauma with Yoga, it's available anywhere books are sold. Bookstores, obviously Amazon, yogafit.com, my personal website, bethshaw.com. And we delve into sound healing. In fact, we just had a really good show on sound healing on Make America Healthy 2 weeks ago. And the correlation between listening to various sounds and mood is quite amazing. And we also get into diet, because food is mood, and there are many foods that will make you not feel good. and many foods that actually help fight depression, that increase serotonin levels. So we list all those foods. We also have a lot of meditation techniques in the book, and give a deep understanding of the brain and how being in a state of trauma makes our prefrontal cortex shrink and makes us operate more from our reptilian brain, the amygdala, where we're always, casing for potential dangers. And that's the way our brain is oriented. But to live in that space for people who've been traumatized is incredibly taxing on the body, on the mind, on the spirit, on the psyche. So just enabling people to kind of chill out naturally becomes very helpful.
Yeah, I think that's important that you mention the brain, because that old kind of rear part of the brain, it is more concerned with survival and just making sure that you live from day to day, versus the frontal part. It has more to do with our higher levels of cognitive reasoning. And a lot of people who deal with pain and stress, they do suffer from brain fog, trouble remembering things, and other issues like that. So I think it's really good that you bring that up. Now,
One thing that we didn't touch on is generational trauma. And so even for a lot of people who perhaps have not experienced trauma in this lifetime, somewhere embedded in your DNA is the trauma that your grandmother might have experienced, or your great grandfather. And these things should not be discounted, because it's part of, again, the totality of who we are. And of course, and we just came out with a new training at YogaFit on collective trauma, because we're living in a time right now where we've all been, I'm traumatized by COVID. I'll be the first one to admit I was living in New York City, and, we were locked up for a long time. I left it at some point, but not soon enough. And, many times if I'm going into a place, I'm like, oh my God, do I have my mask? Like, you know, just things that we're traumatized, and we need to recognize it. Mental health issues are way on the rise. Suicide rates are very high right now. And so we need to be the ever-present guardian of our mental health as well as our physical health.
that's very true. These have been some trying times. Kind of wrapping up here, what are a few final messages that you'd want to leave listeners with today?
Well, I'd like to leave the listeners with the message that your health is your most valuable asset always. And so make sure you're giving yourself the gift of your health on a daily basis, whatever that looks like for you. And it's different for most people. But again, moving your body is a great gift. Eating clean is a great gift. Finding a cause that you can support to help others or animals, also a great gift. And to remember that we really need to be in charge of our own physical and mental health, because while there are professionals to help us, we have to do the heavy lifting.
Absolutely. You're always your own best advocate. And I think that's a great point. Thank you again. It has been a gift having you here on the show today. And thank you so much for sharing your insights. And again, if you want to get Beth's book, it's called Healing Trauma with Yoga and Mind Body Techniques. So thanks, Beth, for joining us.
Thank you very much.
To everyone listening, I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you live in the St. Louis area and you'd like to find out how yoga can help you stay healthy mentally and physically, you can learn about our yoga classes at More for Life. Visit us online at m4lpt.com/yoga. I'll put that in the show notes along with the link to Beth's book. And no matter where you're listening from, if you did enjoy this episode, subscribe to the podcast so you get notified of our future episodes. Thanks again for listening, and have a great day.